الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين وأصحابه المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى قيام يوم الدين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Looking at the prophetic trends historically, we always find that it is the immediate family of the blessed prophets that have been integral to the preaching of the message of God by the prophet and assisting the prophet in making sure that the preaching and the message of the prophet comes to a successful state of culmination and that the message has been imparted to the people. In this way, Islam has been no different. The immediate family of the Prophet have played a most crucial role in ensuring that the message was given out by the blessed Prophet Muhammad. The very first person to be involved with the prophetic message was his wife, Bibi Khadija. Now we often forget the pivotal role that she has played, and that had it not been for her, Islam may not have survived the early phase, the Meccan phase. Now, Lady Khadija is speculated to be a Coptic Christian, and obviously her cousin was possibly a priest. Now, she was the first one who brought faith in the blessed Prophet of Islam and acknowledged him to be a prophet. She was known as the Empress of Arabia due to the amount of wealth that she possessed. Now, not only did she bring faith in the blessed Prophet, we have reports that she would pray alongside the blessed Prophet and Imam Ali in front of the Kaaba, maybe facing the Kaaba, maybe facing some other place, but that's where she would pray with the blessed Prophet. Now, when the Meccans saw that the blessed Prophet was gaining support from the youths and the thinking people of Mecca, they imposed boycotts on the Prophet and his band of followers. It is here that Khadija salamullah alayha expended all her possessions in order to ensure the survival of Islam at that sensitive phase and the most difficult phase that Islam has faced. She gave it all to the Prophet. Now, to the extent that Quran has to say, did he not find you poor and make you needless? The verse of the Quran is immediately attributing the assistance of Lady Khadija to Islam and the Prophet to God Himself. Now you can imagine what an honor it is for Bibi Khadija to feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is attributing her services to Himself. Now this was the most sensitive phase of Islam. And it was only because of Lady Khadija's support that it sustained. In addition to that, we find that emotionally it was very, very difficult for the Prophet to come through that phase. And Bibi Khadija was his pillar of support. She said, I believe in you, and I have full faith and confidence in you. Go forward with your mission. Now we know that the Prophet of Islam, in the beginning phase of preaching Islam, did go through a lot of difficulties emotionally. The Quran echoes the sentiments and the state of the Blessed Prophet within the verses. He, in his humanness, felt a sense of anxiety, felt sometimes a sense of defeat, felt frustration. But she was his pillar of strength. His closest companion was his wife Khadija, and she was the one who supported him blindly, showed him full faith and conviction. This is what assisted the Blessed Prophet in that most sensitive phase of Islam. But look at the end story. When Lady Khadija dies, the Blessed Prophet does not have enough wealth in the wealth of Bibi Khadija to buy her a shroud. And he, according to some reports, buried her in his own cloak. Now here is the mindset of Lady Khadija, that she is so committed to the message that she is not thinking of worldly gain. She is invested in the deeper sense of that message, not the gain of the world or the reward of the world, but totally invested in God, that I will live for the sake of God and die for the sake of God. And we see this similarly expressed within the companions of the Blessed Prophet. When that big rock was placed on the chest of Bilal, and he was asked by his master to denounce God or Allah and to accept faith in Allat and Al-Uzza. And of course, the Khalifa very generously freed him. But Bilal's faith was staunch. He said, I'm ready to die. And then of course, the Sahaba who spent the wealth and freed him and supported the Prophet, their faiths were staunch. This is what ensured the survival of Islam. But nobody was more invested in the message of the Prophet than his immediate family. And we see this especially at the very beginning with Bibi Khadija. Now the way he loved her was unlike the way he loved the rest of his wives. Bibi Aisha narrates that only on 2 occasions did the Prophet become annoyed to the extent that his color changed. One is whenever we would lie, he would stop talking with us. But the other instance is that when the Prophet was nostalgically remembering Bibi Khadija in Medina and overly bestowing upon the friends of Bibi Khadija, Lady Aisha said to the Blessed Prophet, and I suppose it's the nature of a human being to display such sentiments. She said, but hasn't Allah replaced you with one better than her? Talking about herself. Of course, she was considerably younger than Khadija. She wasn't 9 or, we know for a fact that the time when Aisha married, she was 18, between 18 and 22. We know this for a fact. And hopefully this research can come out. She said that the color of the face of the Blessed Prophet changed altogether. And I could see the signs of rage, not only annoyance but rage. She said, I pleaded with him for mercy and forgiveness. And after that, I never ever stopped him from talking well of Lady Khadija. So this was the devotion of the Prophet to her, not only a sentimental devotion, but possibly because of her courage, her belief, her wisdom, and her support. For had it not been for her, Islam may have had a much more difficult time surviving in those initial sensitive years when it was preached amidst the antagonists and the enemies. Now similarly, we find that the most endowed with the prophetic message have always been their families. Zachariah prays for an offspring, and similarly, Moses leaves somebody who he is related to, so on and so forth. It is but natural that the people who are of the blood of the Prophet be more endowed with the light of the Prophet and understanding of the mission of the Prophet than others who are also to be commended for their sacrifice and their belief. But in this way, it's the family first and foremost who are the people who believe in the Prophet. Here we are coming to the mention of Imam Hasan Salamullah alayh. Now, first and foremost, when the verse of the challenge in the form of Mubahila came, the Prophet called out for this challenge of mutual imprecation upon the false party. And in that, people were asked to summon their souls, their women, and their children. Now we have this narration from our Sahih books. So I'm talking about I'm going to narrate from the Sunni books because I do not see a distinction between Sunni and Shia in this regard. We have this narration, therefore, that the Prophet took Ali salamullah alayhi, Lady Fatima, and Al-Hasan and Hussein salamullah alayhima. Now, Imam Hassan was at a tender age at that point, but here was a sensitive issue that only those who are endowed with the light of God may go and claim the righteousness of the claim of Tawheed and the form of God that the Prophet was preaching, and the righteousness of the Prophet's claim. So here we needed individuals who were endowed with the truth. Now Hassan salamullah alayhi and Hussein salamullah alayhi at that tender age, therefore, without maybe even being able to, like a grown up, reason philosophically. I'm not trying to undermine the Imams here, please. Try to hear me as I'm trying to say this. They were spiritually so endowed with the message of the unity of God and the rightfulness of what the Prophet was preaching, that the Prophet took them as his sons according to the verse of the Quran. So the Quran celebrates young Hassan and young Hussein salamullah alayhima with having that spiritual, refined beauty and light of God vested within their chests. So that had Hassan been or Hussein been somebody without that light, the Prophet could not have stood and imprecated upon the false one and invoked the wrath of God upon the false party, because they themselves would have been doubting or undiscerning or unknowing. That just shows the caliber of young Imam Hassan at that point. In the same way, we have in our Sunni hadith that Al-Hasan and Hussein are the two heads of the youths of paradise. Similarly, we have from our Sunni hadith that Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein imaman qama wa qa'ada. They are two imams, whether they stand or whether they sit. And the Sunnis have always interpreted this to mean that Hussein will rise against the tyrant and Hassan will bring about reconciliation. And that too is in accordance with the hadith that the Sunnis narrate, or the Sunni part of our Ummah, in which they say that the Blessed Prophet said, that there are two things that they said that the Blessed Prophet said. One is when people were disparaging, mocking at Imam Ali and swearing at him, and a Sahabi stood and he said, "By God, I have heard the Messenger of God say that Hassan is my son and Hussein is Ali's son." And then the Prophet said, "This son of mine will bring reconciliation between two warring parties of my ummah." And that is why the reconciliation that was brought about at the time of Imam Hassan is celebrated by the Sunnis, that he was indeed the Imam and the son of the Prophet who brought about truce between two Muslim warring factions. Now, I want to go a bit more into it in just a little while. But Imam Hassan, even according to Ibn Taymiyyah, who was a severe and a bitter critique of the Sufis and the Shias, or maybe people who are esoterically inclined and the Shias, even he says Imam Hassan is amongst the Khulafa ar-Rashidun, the righteous Khulafa, because there is a hadith that the righteous Khilafah, according to our Sunni text, that the righteous Khilafah will extend for 30 years. Imam Ali was assassinated after 24 years and 6 odd months. And Imam Hassan became the Khalifa. Now here, Imam Ali did not appoint a Khalifa. Yes, according to the Imamology sort of understanding, Imam Hassan was the Imam. But that is an endowment given by God. Khalifa as a political head of the community is chosen by the people. So Imam Ali did not designate his Khalifa. The people of Kufa, who are the Sahaba and later on accepted by the Sahaba that were within the region of Makkah and Medina and other places, they accepted Imam Hassan as the Khalifa, and that was the mode of choosing a Khalifa. And Imam Hassan stayed a Khalifa for 6 months prior to the breakout of this feud dispute, civil turmoil, and the demand of Muawiyah to hand over the Khilafah to him. So we know that Imam Hasan was the person who brought about this beautiful reconciliation amongst the Muslims. Now I want to talk more about it. But the Sunnis also believe in Imam Hasan as a rightful Khalifa. But because the span of his Khilafah was only 6 months, we join it with the Khilafah of Ali ibn Abi Talib salamullah alayhi, in addition with the first 3 Khulafa. Now this is according to the Sunni literature. Now we see that there is great merit in Al-Hasan salamullah alayhi. Now, Imam Hasan was the older of the 2 brothers. And Imam Hussein did say to Bibi Zainab that, look, on his final farewell, that the Prophet of God, Imam Ali, Imam Hasan were all better than I am. They have all died. Death will not spare me. And we can see Al-Hasan, salamullah alayhi, was a phenomenal person. It's a shame that we don't study him. That when Muawiyah was giving his speech, claiming the Khilafah for himself, Imam Hussein was enraged. And Imam Hasan calmed Imam Hussein down and then gave an eloquent sermon putting Muawiyah in his place. But the claim of Muawiyah was that I want to avenge the blood of Uthman, Khalifa Uthman. And one of the reasons Imam Hasan abdicated was to say to Muawiyah that, go on, show us the killers of Uthman and take the revenge. And as soon as he got the treaty signed, as if Uthman did not exist for Muawiyah. He was a non-entity. So it was a whole ploy to gain Khilafah. But the main thing here is the whole mindset of the Prophet and his family as opposed to the mindset of Muawiyah. The Prophet came like Jesus, like Moses, like Jesus, like Nabi Nuh, like Abraham. He preached a message of God and God centricity to the minds of their listeners and introduced a higher sense of existence and purpose, a nobler sense of existence through God within the hearts of the people. He was not concerned with expanding the Islamic empire through warfare. We only find towards the end of the prophetic mission that there are expeditions, but even those we can justify in line with his essential message. He wasn't much concerned about expanding the Muslim empire with the force of the sword. They were endowed with the message of God like none other, that the message of God cannot be preached by the force of the sword. The message of God has to spread within the hearts. There has to be the spiritual awakening. So having worldly leadership is not as important as looking at the human community from now till the day of Qiyamah and steering the course of the Ummah in a way that they will gradually and naturally culminate in their glorious state towards the end. These religious figures, their concern was never to spread the word of God immediately. Their concern was always to graduate the human family in godliness towards the end of its human journey. Let's explain this just briefly. From primary education, the parents, the instructors, the government, the system are looking at a child and the group of the class, not immediately, but with the view of their eventual graduation, aren't they? So even if a student fails, there are always provisos made that provided you revise again and you can pass your exam, we will continue with you, we will persevere with you. Until either a student graduates through the course of studies at the age of 24 or they fail. But even if they fail, there is some other part for them that they can play equally. So this is how we look. This is how the prophets used to view the human community. That from the time of Adam till the time of the coming of the Mahdi and Isa, this is how we want humanity to progress. Now this is only done by educating humanity by endowing them with that spiritual insight that eventually you have to get there. Now Hasan Salamullah alayhi was endowed in this way. For him, victory was not to gain control over the Muslim community. And this is the reason why when Imam Hassan was given the oath of allegiance, the condition was made that he will follow God's dictates in the book, and he will follow the sunnah of the Prophet, and he will fight against all those who are transgressive. Imam Hassan said, take off the final condition, because he knew that these people lacked resolve. And he knew that it will not end in a favorable manner. In any case, they insisted. Now, before I finish this khutbah, Imam Hussein Salamullah alayhi was phenomenal, and in those few hours of his epic battle in Ashura has changed the course of human destiny, we know this. But that was because Imam Hassan had already unveiled in the face of Muawiyah, that people already knew what Muawiyah was, what Yazid was. The other thing is this, that as Imam Hussein says, it is easier for me to taste the blade than to exist in humiliation. Imam Hussein said that, didn't he? It is very difficult for a noble man to live a life in which they are humiliated. We find this, you will read this in the du'as of Ramadan and Sha'ban. Shamatatul a'da. O Lord, spare me the mockery of my adversaries. Al-Hassan, after the truce, they used to address him, Ya Mudill al-Mu'mineen, or the one who has disgraced the Mu'mineen. And he endured and persevered. This is only because he valued the message of the Prophet, the well-being of humanity, the light that was invested inside him, prompted him to sacrifice his good name for the sake of the greater good. And I do believe that that is the greatest sacrifice anybody can give. About the Prophet it is said, لا تأخذه في الله لومة لائم, that the scorning and the mockery that he received in his missionary role did not deter him from preaching the truth. This is the most difficult part. And Al-Hassan withstood that. Now, before I finish this khutbah, very, very quickly. Baqarah Sadr, I remember reading this in my earlier days, like much, much earlier in my life, when I began my education in 1985, or maybe at that point, religious education. Baqarah Sadr speculates, may Allah, a'lala maqamuhu, may Allah bless him with paradise. He said, actually the Romans, because the Muslim empire was now extending its domain, the Romans were looking for an opportunity that they could mount an attack against the Muslims, but they could only find that opportunity when there was civil strife and civil war. And of course, Muawiyah was constantly involved in those types of expeditions. And they were looking forward to a full-fledged civil war within the Muslim lands. Baqarah Sadr surmises that Imam Hassan had his sight there as well. That if the Muslims were to engage in a bloody civil war, it would weaken them to an extent that they would be defenseless. Now you can imagine that the Imam who was taken to Mubahila at that tender age, an Imam who is said that he is an Imam while sitting down, you can believe that he did have that foresight, that he knew because of the resolve of the people around him. And we need to go and read the type of people who joined forces with him. Their motivation was not Islam, their motivation was gain and tribal sentiments and so on and so forth. That these people, they lack the resolve, and it will not by any means be an easy victory. And it will be so devastating that it will weaken the Muslim state. And hence, the best option is to abdicate and to bring about peace and to let the events unfold calmly with an eventual end of refining the hearts. I've overdone the khutbah today, but I still have to go through the second khutbah. Let us pray for the shifa of all those who are unwell, and for all the marhumin, be they Muslim, non-Muslim. May Allah forgive them all and elevate their ranks, and may Allah forgive us. Al-Fatiha. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وآله الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Just 2 points. That we are told to excessively love the qurba of the Prophet, which primarily means his Ahlul Bayt. Bibi Aisha narrates that those 5 people, Muhammad Rasulullah, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, Bibi Fatima, Imam Al-Hasan, Imam Al-Hussein, were beneath the cloak, and the Prophet said, these are my Ahlul Bayt. In the land of Mubahila, the Prophet said, these are my Ahlul Bayt. So when we are told to love excessively the near ones of the Prophet, it means immediately his Ahlul Bayt. It does not exclude his wives. It does not exclude his noble companions who have given so much sacrifice. We love them all. But immediately it means his Ahlul Bayt, and immediately these 4 individuals in addition to the Prophet. Now, by love, it also means to act in accordance with their actions, to learn from them. We cannot resort to Muawiyah type of thinking and politics. Muawiyah was shrewd and cunning. Imam Ali wrote to him once that if I wanted to, I could outwit you any day, but this is below my dignity. And this is below what God expects from me. God expects righteousness. There is no good in gaining authority within community for the sake of a few years and then messing up the minds of the community for years to come. Especially not when it divides the community and brings about discord and hatred amongst the parts of different parts of the community. Muawiyah resorted to lies. Muawiyah resorted to slander. Muawiyah resorted to bribery. These are the tools of Muawiyah. These are the tools of Bani Umayyah. These are the tools of Shaitan. The first thing Muawiyah would do were to buy out the preachers. Think about this. Please think about this. Isn't this what we witness often within our own setups? Be they Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu, be they Sunni or Shia, be they at the state level of a state or at the level of our federations and communities. Isn't this exactly the same trend we witness? We need to purge ourselves of this tendency of Muawiyah that exists in all of us. Muawiyah exemplified and amplified that arrogance of Iblis, and he would stop at nothing to gain mastery and power over people. This is not what the Prophet has showed. This is not what the blessed family of the Prophet has showed. No, think of the future. By your actions, O leaders, even if you are a leader of a community, you are setting a precedent. The Imam has said that the morals of a leader are more penetrative within the souls of the individuals than is the effect of milk that the child derives from the bosom of his mother. Think about these things. Now I need to stop here, and the second point is, this is the blessed month of Ramadan. Especially in this month, give charity excessively and seek forgiveness for one and all excessively. Now the charity is not restricted to Muslim, and forgiveness is not restricted to Muslim. If you were to do that, you are not acting on behalf of God. God is not a Muslim. We need to get that into our minds. God does not worship anybody. He's the author of religions. He gives to one and all, unrestrictedly. Give to one and all. Wherever there be a need, give. Start with the neighbors, as the Quran is saying, with the family, with the kin, with the orphans, with the neighbors. And seek forgiveness for one and all. There's only one red line according to the Quran. The Quran is saying to the Prophet, do not pray for them. If you pray for them 70 times, I will not forgive them. Don't stand at their graves when they die. But you know who they are? These are the known hypocrites within Islam. And then the next verse in Surah Tawbah clarifies, مَا كَانَ إِسْتِغْفَارِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ لَأَبِيهِ. The forgiveness sought by Ibrahim for his father was not but to an appointed time. And when it became clear to Ibrahim that Azar was an enemy of God, at that point he did not seek forgiveness for him. The red line is a confirmed enemy of God. Until and unless you don't know anybody is the enemy of God, seek forgiveness from them, for that is the prophetic sentiment. And that is what God is telling us in the Quran. If we don't seek forgiveness for other than the Muslims, then that shows that these hearts are sick. It shows they're not godly. Islam has become another demon, another idol, another pagan religion, as paganism was. And in fact, Islam, Christianity, Shia, Sunni, the way we are understanding them, they've all become idols in the name of godly religion. We need to examine ourselves and get this very, very accurate. Let the hearts open. Let them flow. Become godly. Melt away in God. Who knows? Today I stand before you. Who knows if it snatches my next breath, or who will stand before you next week? Why waste this moment? Embrace God beautifully and give ourselves to Him beautifully and love the human family and want the best for them. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalam ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Muhammadin al-Mustafa wa ala Aliyin al-Murtada wa ala Fatimat al-Zahra wa ala al-Hasan al-Mujtaba wal Hussein al-Shaheed bi Karbala wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa Muhammad ibn Ali wa Ja'far ibn Muhammad wa Musa ibn Ja'far wa Ali ibn Musa wa Muhammad ibn Ali wa Ali ibn Muhammad wal Hasan ibn Ali wa Hujjatillah ibn al-Hasan al-Qa'im al-Mahdi al-Muntadhar. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا الله من أنصارك وأعوانك والمستشهدين بين يديك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن